I remember the day everything changed. He smiled, like he always did, and I smiled back. But this time, it felt different. This time, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. My name is Emma Harper, and I'm 14 years old. At least, I think I am. Sometimes I feel like I'm much older, like I'm carrying the weight of an entire lifetime on my shoulders. Other times, I feel like I'm still that little girl who used to believe her daddy was a superhero, who used to run to him when thunder scared me at night, who used to think that nothing bad could ever happen as long as he was there to protect me. How wrong I was. I live in Elmwood, a neighborhood in the Chicago suburbs where all the houses look the same, where all the yards are perfectly manicured, and where all the secrets are buried deep beneath layers of social respectability and false appearances. It's the kind of place where people wave at each other from their driveways, where children ride bikes until the streetlights come on, where everyone knows everyone else's business, except for the things that really matter. The dark things. The things that happen behind closed doors when the rest of the world is asleep. Our house sits at the end of Maple Street, a two-story colonial with white shutters and a red door that my mother painted last spring, because she said it would make us look more welcoming. There's a garden in the front yard where she grows roses, and a wooden swing on the front porch that my father built when I was 7. From the outside, we look like the American dream. From the inside, we're living a nightmare that I can't wake up from. This morning, like every other morning for the past 6 months, I was sitting at the kitchen table pretending to eat my cereal. The milk had gone warm, and the cornflakes were floating like tiny life rafts in a sea I couldn't bring myself to navigate. The spoon felt heavy in my hand, like it was made of lead instead of stainless steel. Everything felt heavy these days. My backpack, my feet when I walked, the air I breathed, the words I couldn't say. My mother, Lisa, was watching me with that worried look she can't hide anymore. It's been growing stronger every day, that look. It starts in her eyes, these deep brown eyes that used to sparkle when she laughed, but now seem clouded with a concern she doesn't understand. She works as a nurse at Chicago Memorial Hospital, and she's used to taking care of everyone. She's the kind of person who brings soup to sick neighbors, who volunteers at the school fundraisers, who never misses a parent-teacher conference. But lately I can tell she doesn't know how to help me, and it's eating her alive. "Emma, honey, you haven't even touched your breakfast," she said, and I could hear the anguish bleeding through her voice like watercolors on wet paper. Her hand was wrapped around her coffee mug so tightly that her knuckles were white. She was wearing her pale blue scrubs, the ones with tiny flowers embroidered on the collar, and her hair was pulled back in the same ponytail she'd worn every day for as long as I could remember. I wanted to respond. Wanted to tell her I was fine, wanted to reach across the table and hold her hand, and promise her that everything would be okay. But the words seemed trapped in my throat, locked behind a wall of fear and shame that grew higher every day. It was like there was an invisible hand squeezing my neck every time I tried to speak about what was happening to me. The truth felt too heavy, too dark, too dangerous to let out into the light of our perfect kitchen with its yellow walls and ceramic roosters, and the smell of coffee that used to make me feel safe. That's when I heard the footsteps on the stairs, heavy, measured, deliberate. My entire body contracted like I'd been struck by lightning. My muscles tensed, my breathing became shallow, and I felt that horrible sensation in my stomach, like I was falling off a cliff with no end in sight. The spoon slipped from my fingers and clattered against the bowl, the sound echoing in the sudden silence like a gunshot. It was always like this when he approached. My body knew before my mind did. My body remembered things I was trying so hard to forget, things that happened in the dark when the house was quiet, things that he told me were normal, things that he said all fathers did with their daughters. But I knew they weren't normal. I knew because of the way he looked around first to make sure we were alone. I knew because of the way he told me it was our special secret. I knew because of the way my skin crawled every time he touched me, the way my stomach turned whenever he called me his special girl, the way I wanted to disappear every time he explained that this was how fathers showed love. My father, Michael Harper, entered the kitchen like he did every morning at exactly 7:15. To everyone who knows him, he's the perfect man. Tall, strong, always well-dressed, always with a smile plastered across his face like a mask he never takes off. He's 46 years old, works as a supervisor at Hanson Manufacturing, and has gray-streaked hair that's always perfectly combed. His beard is always trimmed, his shirts always pressed, his shoes always polished. He's the neighbor who helps carry groceries when Mrs. Patterson's arthritis flares up, the husband who brings my mother flowers every Friday, the father who never missed a school presentation or soccer game or dance recital. He volunteers at the church, coaches Little League on weekends, and everyone in the neighborhood thinks he's wonderful. "You're so lucky to have such a devoted father," my friends always tell me. "I wish my dad was like yours," they say with envy in their voices. If only they knew. But I knew another Michael Harper. I knew the man who existed when nobody else was looking, when the curtains were drawn and the doors were locked. I knew the monster that lived behind those kind eyes and gentle words, the predator that wore the mask of a loving father. I knew the man who came to my room after midnight, who whispered things that made my skin crawl, who told me that this was normal, that this was what love looked like, that this was our special bond that no one else could understand. "Good morning, princess," he said, approaching me with that smile that used to make me feel safe, but now made me want to vomit. His voice was warm, cheerful, exactly the same tone he used when other people were around, but I could see something different in his eyes, something that made my blood run cold. It was a warning, a reminder, a promise that he was always watching, always waiting, always in control. I stood up so fast I almost knocked over the chair. My backpack was on the table, and I grabbed it like it was a lifeline, like it was the only thing keeping me from drowning in this suffocating house that used to be my home. My hands were shaking, and I hoped he wouldn't notice, but I knew he saw everything. He always did. "I need to go to school," I mumbled, not looking at him. I couldn't look at him anymore. Every time I did, I saw things I wished I could unsee, heard things I wished I could unhear. I saw the man who had stolen my childhood, my innocence, my ability to trust anyone or anything. "Emma, wait! You haven't even—" I heard my mother start to speak, confusion and worry thick in her voice, but I was already running toward the door. I heard him say something to her, something about teenage hormones and growing pains, something that made her laugh nervously. He was so good at explaining away my behavior, so good at making everything seem normal, so good at being the perfect father in front of everyone else. Outside, the cold December air burned my lungs, but I kept walking fast down the sidewalk. The snow crunched under my feet, and my breath came out in white puffs that disappeared into the gray morning sky. I looked back only once and saw my father watching me through the window, his silhouette dark against the warm light of the kitchen. Even from a distance, I could feel his gaze on me, like a weight pressing down on my shoulders, like a chain around my neck, like a voice whispering in my ear. "You can run, but you can't hide forever. You belong to me." The walk to school usually took 15 minutes, but that morning it felt like hours. Every step was an effort. Every breath was a struggle. I felt like I was moving through thick mud, like the air itself was trying to hold me back. Other kids passed me on their way to school, laughing, talking, complaining about homework and tests and all the normal things that normal teenagers worry about. I envied them so much it physically hurt. They had no idea how lucky they were to have normal problems, normal families, normal lives. At school, nobody noticed I was different. Or maybe they did notice, but didn't know what to say. How do you explain to someone that you're afraid to go home? How do you explain that the person who's supposed to protect you is exactly the person you need protection from? How do you tell your friends that your perfect suburban life is actually a nightmare wrapped in a pretty package? How do you find the words for something that doesn't have words? I sat through my classes like a ghost, present but not really there. My body was in the classroom, but my mind was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold where no one could reach me. Math equations blurred together on the blackboard. Historical dates became meaningless numbers. English literature turned into words on a page that I couldn't connect to anything real. My English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, asked me twice if I was feeling all right. She's one of the younger teachers, probably in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She's the type of person who actually cares about her students, who stays after school to help with homework, who remembers birthdays, and asks about family vacations. "Emma, you seem distracted today. Is everything okay at home?" she asked after class, her hand gently touching my shoulder. For a moment I almost told her. I almost opened my mouth and let the truth spill out like poison from a wound. I almost said, "No, Mrs. Rodriguez, everything is not okay at home. My father is destroying me piece by piece, and I don't know how to stop him." But instead, I just nodded and smiled. That fake smile I'd perfected over the months. The one that said, "Everything's fine," when everything was falling apart. "Just tired," I whispered. "I didn't sleep well last night." She looked at me for a long moment, like she was trying to see through my lie, but then she nodded and let me go. I wonder sometimes if she suspected something, if she saw the cracks in my carefully constructed facade. I wonder if she lay awake at night thinking about the quiet girl in her third period class who used to love reading but now couldn't focus on anything. During lunch I hid in the library bathroom and cried until my eyes were red and swollen. The tears came in waves, each one carrying a piece of the pain I couldn't express anywhere else. I pressed my hands against my mouth to muffle the sobs, terrified that someone would hear me and ask questions I couldn't answer. Then I splashed cold water on my face and practiced my smile in the mirror until it looked convincing again. I'd become an expert at pretending, an actress in the most important role of my life, the role of a normal teenager with normal problems. I studied my reflection, checking for any signs that might give me away. Were my eyes too red? Was my smile bright enough? Did I look like someone whose world was falling apart? Or did I look like every other 14-year-old girl in suburban Chicago? The girl in the mirror looked back at me with eyes that seemed older than her years, eyes that had seen too much, eyes that held secrets too dark for someone so young. But to anyone else, she probably just looked tired. That night when I got home, the house felt different. There was a tension in the air, thick and suffocating, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. My mother was in the kitchen, making dinner with more force than necessary, banging pots and slamming cabinet doors. She barely looked at me when I walked in. "How was school?" she asked, but her voice was strained, distracted. "Fine," I replied, the same automatic response I gave every day. I could hear my father in the living room, watching the news and laughing at something on television. The sound of his laughter made my skin crawl. How could he laugh so easily? How could he act so normal when he was destroying me from the inside out? I went straight to my room and pushed a chair against the door. It had become my nightly ritual, this small act of defiance, this tiny barrier between him and me. I know my mother thought it was strange. She'd asked me about it once, and I'd told her I just wanted privacy. But the chair was more than that. It was the only thing that made me feel somewhat safe, the only thing that gave me the illusion of control in a situation where I had none. But I knew a chair wouldn't be enough forever. Nothing would be enough forever. He was getting bolder, more demanding, more threatening. The things he whispered to me were getting darker. The promises he made about what would happen if I told anyone were getting more specific, more terrifying. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I counted the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd put up there when I was 10. There were 37 of them, arranged in no particular pattern, just scattered across the white paint like real stars across a night sky. I used to make wishes on them, used to believe that if I wished hard enough, anything was possible. Now I wished for only one thing, for someone to save me. I wondered if anyone would ever discover the truth. If someone would ever look at me and see beyond my fake smile, beyond my excuses, beyond my silence. I wondered if anyone would ever care enough to ask the right questions, to notice the signs I was too scared to show, to see that I was drowning in plain sight. I wanted to scream, but I'd forgotten how to use my own voice. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I wanted to disappear, but I was trapped in this perfect house, in this perfect family, in this perfect lie that was slowly killing me from the inside. The darkness outside my window matched the darkness inside my heart, and I closed my eyes, hoping that tomorrow would be the day someone would finally see me, really see me, and understand that I was dying a little more each day. But until then, I would keep pretending. I would keep smiling. I would keep playing the role of the perfect daughter in the perfect family, because that's what he'd taught me to do, and I was too afraid to stop. I didn't know who I was anymore. The girl who used to laugh at everything now found it hard to even look at herself in the mirror. Every time I tried to speak out, a part of me wanted to stay silent. It was like I had forgotten how to use my own voice. 3 weeks passed, and I could see that my mother was getting desperate. She started watching me differently, like she was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. I knew she noticed my behavioral changes, how I stopped eating dinner with the family, how I invented excuses to come home late from school, how I spent entire weekends locked in my room or at friends' houses. But what disturbed her most were the nightmares. Almost every night she could hear me screaming in my sleep, muffled screams like I was trying to ask for help, but couldn't find my own voice. Sometimes I would wake up in cold sweats, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode in my chest. The dreams were always the same: dark rooms, heavy breathing, hands where they shouldn't be, and a voice whispering, "This is our little secret." One January morning I could see in my mother's eyes that she had made a decision she couldn't ignore anymore. "Emma, we need to talk," she said, sitting on my bed while I was getting ready for school. My hands started shaking as I brushed my hair. "About what, Mom?" "About what's happening to you. About why you're different. About why you won't look at your father anymore." The brush fell from my hands and clattered on the floor. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. For a moment I thought about telling her everything. I thought about opening my mouth and letting all the poison spill out, all the shame, all the fear, all the nights I lay awake wishing I was someone else, somewhere else. But then I heard his voice downstairs, laughing at something on the TV, and the words died in my throat again. "I don't know what you're talking about," I whispered, picking up the brush with trembling fingers. My mother grabbed my hands and made me look at her. Her eyes were filled with tears she was trying not to shed. "Emma, honey, I'm your mother. I know when something is wrong. Please, talk to me." For a second I almost broke. I almost told her that her perfect husband, her devoted father to her only daughter, was slowly destroying me piece by piece. I almost told her about the late-night visits to my room, about the threats whispered in my ear, about how he made me feel like it was all my fault. But I also knew what would happen if I told her. I knew she wouldn't believe me. How could she? He was so perfect, so charming, so loved by everyone who knew him. And I was just a confused teenager going through a difficult phase. "Mom, I'm fine. Really? Just tired from school." I lied, and I saw her heart break a little more. That afternoon my mother made a phone call that would change everything. I was in my room pretending to do homework when I heard her talking quietly on the phone in the kitchen. "Dr. Stevens, this is Lisa Harper. I need to schedule an appointment for my daughter. Something is very wrong, and I don't know what else to do." My blood ran cold. A psychologist. She was taking me to see a psychologist. Part of me felt relief. Maybe, finally, someone would see the truth. But another part of me felt terrified. What if he found out? What if he thought I had betrayed our secret? What would he do to me then? That night at dinner, my father seemed particularly cheerful. He told jokes, asked about my day, complimented my mother's cooking. But I could see him watching me from the corner of his eye, like a predator studying its prey. "Lisa mentioned you might be feeling a bit stressed lately, Princess," he said, cutting his steak with methodical precision. "Growing up can be tough, can't it?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You know you can talk to your old dad about anything, right? We don't need strangers getting involved in our family business." The threat was subtle but clear. I understood the message. Keep your mouth shut, or else. "Of course, Dad," I managed to whisper. But deep down, something was changing. Maybe it was the way my mother looked at me with such love and concern. Maybe it was the exhaustion of carrying this secret alone for so long. Maybe it was the tiny spark of hope that someone, somewhere, might actually believe me. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the house settle into darkness, I made a decision that scared me more than anything else in my life. I was going to tell the truth, even if it destroyed everything, even if nobody believed me, even if it meant losing the only family I had ever known, because I realized that I was already lost. I was already drowning, and maybe, just maybe, speaking the truth would be the only way to save myself. The appointment was scheduled for next week. 7 days to gather the courage I had never had before. 7 days to find my voice in the darkness that had consumed me for so long. 7 days to change my life forever. The room was always dim, the curtains drawn tight. It was as if the sunlight never dared to touch the walls where I grew up. But that day, there was light, and I wasn't sure if it was real or just the reflection of everything I had been hiding from. Dr. Sarah Stevens had been practicing child psychology for 15 years, but she had never forgotten her first rule: listen to what the child doesn't say. In her office on the third floor of the Elmwood Medical Center, she had seen hundreds of cases: anxiety, depression, behavioral issues, family trauma. She thought she had seen it all. She was wrong. The appointment was scheduled for 3:30 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. I remember every detail of that day because it was the day my life split into two parts: before I spoke and after. The sky was that particular shade of gray that Chicago gets in late January, when winter feels like it will never end, and the cold seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. My mother drove me to the appointment in complete silence. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles were white, and I could see her stealing glances at me in the rearview mirror every few seconds. She was wearing her navy blue coat, the one she only wore to important occasions, and her hair was pulled back in a bun that made her look older than her 42 years. "Emma," she said finally, as we pulled into the parking lot of the medical center, "I want you to know that whatever you tell Dr. Stevens, I love you. Nothing will change that. Nothing." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reach over and take her hand and tell her everything right there in the car. But my father's voice was still echoing in my head from that morning. "Remember, Princess, family business stays in the family. Some people wouldn't understand our special relationship. They might try to take you away from me, and we wouldn't want that, would we?" The medical center smelled like disinfectant and fear. My footsteps echoed on the polished linoleum floors as we walked down the corridor to Dr. Stevens's office. The walls were painted a soothing shade of blue, and there were inspirational posters everywhere: children laughing, families hugging, words like hope and healing in cheerful fonts. It all felt like a lie. Dr. Stevens was not what I expected. She was younger than I thought she would be, maybe in her early 40s, with shoulder-length brown hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a simple gray sweater and black pants, nothing intimidating or clinical. When she smiled, it reached her eyes, and for the first time in months, I felt like maybe someone might actually listen to me. "Hello, Emma," she said, extending her hand for me to shake. "I'm Dr. Stevens, but you can call me Sarah if you prefer. Would you like your mother to stay for a few minutes, or would you rather talk alone?" The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me what I wanted before. "Alone," I whispered, surprising myself with the speed of my answer. My mother kissed my forehead and whispered, "I'll be right here in the waiting room. Take your time, sweetheart." Dr. Stevens' office was different from what I had imagined. Instead of a clinical desk and uncomfortable chairs, there was a comfortable couch, soft lighting, and shelves filled with books and small toys. There was a box of tissues on every surface, and I wondered how many people had cried in this room, how many secrets had been shared within these walls. "You can sit anywhere you'd like," she said, settling into a chair across from the couch. "Some people prefer the couch, some like the chair by the window. There's no right or wrong choice." I chose the corner of the couch, pulling my legs up under me and wrapping my arms around a soft throw pillow. It felt like armor, something to protect me from the questions I knew were coming. "Your mother told me she's worried about you," Dr. Stevens began, her voice gentle but direct. "She says you've been having trouble sleeping, that you seem anxious, and that you've been avoiding your father. Can you tell me about that?" The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was brave enough to cross. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times, but now that it was here, my throat felt like it was closing up. "I don't know what she means," I said automatically, the lie falling from my lips like it had been programmed into me. Dr. Stevens nodded, making a note on her pad. "That's okay. Sometimes it's hard to put feelings into words. Can you tell me about your family? What's it like at home?" "Normal," I said, but the word felt foreign in my mouth. "We're just a normal family." "Oh, what does normal look like for you?" The question was simple, but it hit me like a physical blow. What was normal? I had lost track of what normal families looked like, what normal fathers did, what normal daughters felt when their fathers came to their rooms at night. "I don't know," I whispered, and for the first time, it was the truth. Dr. Stevens leaned forward slightly. "Emma, I want you to know that this is a safe space. Nothing you say here will leave this room without your permission. unless I believe you're in immediate danger. Do you understand what that means? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed her. Adults always said things like that, but then they broke their promises when it mattered most. Can you tell me about your nightmares? The question hit me like a slap. How did she know about the nightmares? Had my mother been listening to me scream in my sleep? Had she heard me calling for help in my dreams? I don't have nightmares, I lied, but my voice was shaking. Your mother mentioned that you've been crying out in your sleep. That must be frightening for you. Tears started to burn behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. I couldn't cry. If I started crying, I might not be able to stop. If I started crying, I might tell her everything. Sometimes I have bad dreams, I admitted finally. But everyone has bad dreams sometimes. What are your bad dreams about? The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, and my hands were shaking. In my dreams I was always running, always trying to hide, always trying to scream, but no sound would come out. In my dreams he was always there, always following me, always reminding me that I belonged to him. Dark places, I whispered. I dream about dark places where I can't get out. Dr. Stevens set down her notepad and looked at me directly. Emma, I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've learned that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is tell the truth, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. Something in her voice made me look up at her. There was no judgment in her eyes, no disbelief, no impatience, just compassion and a quiet strength that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, she could handle the truth. What if the truth ruins everything? I asked, my voice barely audible. What if keeping it secret ruins you? The question hung in the air between us, and I felt something crack open inside my chest. All the walls I had built, all the defenses I had constructed, all the lies I had told myself to survive, they all came crashing down at once. He comes to my room, I whispered, so quietly that I wasn't sure she heard me. But she had heard me. I could see it in the way her posture changed, the way her eyes softened, the way she leaned forward just slightly. Who comes to your room, Emma? My father. The words felt like poison leaving my mouth, like something toxic and dangerous that had been festering inside me for too long. He comes to my room at night, and he says it's our special secret. He says it's how fathers show love to their daughters. He says that if I tell anyone, they'll take me away from him, and that no one would believe me anyway, because he's such a good man. The words kept coming, faster now, like a dam had burst. I told her about the first time it happened, when I was 11 and thought I was having a nightmare. I told her about how he gradually convinced me that it was normal, that it was love, that it was our special bond. I told her about the threats, the manipulation, the way he made me feel like I was the one doing something wrong. I told her about the shame that ate at me every day, the way I felt dirty and broken and worthless. I told her about how I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on anything because his voice was always in my head, reminding me that I was his, that I belonged to him, that no one else would ever love me the way he did. When I finally stopped talking, the room was completely silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing. Dr. Stevens hadn't moved, hadn't interrupted, hadn't looked at me with disgust or disbelief. She had just listened, and somehow that simple act of listening felt like the most powerful thing anyone had ever done for me. Emma, she said finally, her voice steady but filled with emotion, what you've told me is not normal. What your father is doing to you is called sexual abuse, and it is not your fault. It is not love. It is not special. It is a crime, and you are incredibly brave for telling me. The words hit me like a physical force. Sexual abuse. Crime. Not my fault. I had never heard anyone say those words about what was happening to me. I had never heard anyone call me brave. But he said, I started to protest, the years of manipulation still fighting against the truth. I don't care what he said. Dr. Stevens interrupted gently but firmly. What he told you were lies designed to keep you quiet and to make you feel responsible for his actions. You are not responsible. You are the victim, and you deserve to be protected. I broke down then, truly broke down for the first time in 3 years. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere I had buried all the pain and fear and shame. Dr. Stevens didn't try to stop me or comfort me with empty words. She just sat with me in my pain, and let me cry until I had no tears left. "What happens now?" I asked finally, my voice hoarse from crying. "Now we make sure you're safe," she said. "I'm going to have to call Child Protective Services. I know that's scary, but there are people whose job it is to protect children like you. Your mother will need to know what's been happening, and there will be an investigation." Terror flooded through me. "He'll kill me," I whispered. "He told me he would kill me if I ever told anyone." "He's not going to hurt you anymore," Dr. Stevens said with a certainty that I wanted desperately to believe. "From this moment on, you are going to be protected. I promise you that." But even as she spoke, I could feel the walls of my carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around me. My father's voice echoed in my head. "No one will believe you. You'll destroy our family. You'll have nowhere to go." As Dr. Stevens reached for her phone to make the calls that would change everything, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a world where I was safe, where I could sleep without fear, where I could be a normal 14-year-old girl with normal problems. It seemed impossible, but for the first time in 3 years it also seemed possible, and that tiny spark of hope was enough to keep me breathing. I looked in the mirror that morning, and for the first time, I didn't hate what I saw. I wasn't broken anymore. I was just someone who had been through hell and survived. The world exploded in slow motion. That's the only way I can describe what happened in the hours after I told Dr. Stevens the truth. It was like watching a building collapse in one of those controlled demolitions. You know it's coming. You can see the charges being set. But when it actually happens, the destruction is both inevitable and shocking. Dr. Stevens made 3 phone calls while I sat curled up on her couch, clutching that throw pillow like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become liquid. The first call was to Child Protective Service. The second was to the police. The third was to my mother. I couldn't hear exactly what she was saying. Her voice was low and professional, but I could see my mother through the glass partition that separated the office from the waiting room. I watched her face change as Dr. Stevens spoke to her on the phone. First confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked like she had been punched in the stomach. When Dr. Stevens hung up, my mother was already at the door. "Emma?" she said, her voice breaking on my name. "Emma, is it true?" I couldn't look at her. I couldn't bear to see the pain in her eyes, the accusation, the disbelief. I had destroyed her world with my words, just like he said I would. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom." But instead of anger, instead of blame, I felt her arms around me. She was crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. "Oh, sweetheart," she kept saying. "Oh, my baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't know. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." Dr. Stevens explained the next steps while my mother held me. There would be a medical examination. There would be interviews with specially trained detectives. There would be an investigation that could take months. And there would be a decision about whether it was safe for me to go home. "He can't know," I said suddenly, panic rising in my throat. "He can't know that I told. He'll hurt me. He'll hurt both of us." "The police are going to your house right now," Dr. Stevens said gently. "He's being arrested as we speak. He won't be able to hurt you anymore." But I knew my father. I knew how charming he could be, how convincing. I knew that he would deny everything, that he would make me look like a troubled teenager making up stories for attention. I knew that our perfect suburban neighbors would never believe that the man who coached Little League and helped elderly Mrs. Patterson with her groceries could be capable of such things. And I was right. The news spread through Elmwood like wildfire. By the time my mother and I got home, escorted by a police officer and a social worker, there were already neighbors standing in their driveways, whispering behind their hands, staring at our house like it had suddenly become contaminated. Mrs. Henderson from next door came over within an hour, her face a mask of concern and barely concealed excitement. She was the neighborhood gossip, the woman who knew everyone's business and made it her mission to spread information whether it was true or not. "Lisa, dear," she said, pushing past my mother at the front door, "I heard there was some kind of misunderstanding. Michael called me from the police station. He's beside himself with worry. He said Emma's been having some problems lately, making up stories. You know how teenage girls can be." I watched my mother's face change, watched her spine straighten, watched her transform from a woman broken by grief into a mother protecting her child. "It's not a misunderstanding, Patricia," she said, her voice cold as winter, "and I'd appreciate it if you left my house, now." But Mrs. Henderson wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, as word spread and the details became public, our house became the center of a storm that threatened to tear our entire world apart. Some people believed. My English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, came by with flowers and a card that said, "I should have known. I should have seen the signs. You are so brave." The social worker, a kind woman named Ms. Chen, explained that this was normal, that communities often divided when allegations of abuse were made against someone who was well-liked and respected. But others didn't believe. They couldn't reconcile the image of Michael Harper, devoted father, helpful neighbor, pillar of the community, with the monster I had described. They whispered that I was troubled, that I was seeking attention, that I was lying to hurt my family. The worst part was seeing my mother struggle with her own guilt and confusion. She kept apologizing to me, kept asking how she could have missed the signs, kept torturing herself with questions that had no good answers. "I should have known," she said one night as we sat in the kitchen, both of us unable to sleep. "I'm your mother. I should have protected you." "He was good at hiding it," I told her. "He made sure you never saw. But the chair against your door, the nightmares, the way you stopped eating with us, I noticed all of it, but I didn't know what it meant." "Because you're not a monster," I said. "Because normal people don't think that way. Because you trusted him." The investigation moved slowly, like all official processes do. I had to tell my story again and again, to detectives, to prosecutors, to doctors, to social workers. Each time it got a little easier and a little harder. Easier because the words came more naturally, because I was no longer carrying the secret alone. Harder because I had to relive the trauma every time, because I had to see the pain in other people's eyes when they heard what had been done to me. My father, meanwhile, had been released on bail. He was staying with his brother across town, prohibited from contacting me or coming to the house, but his presence hung over everything like a dark cloud. I knew he was out there, knew he was planning his defense, knew he was probably convincing people that I was lying. 3 weeks after my confession, I was walking home from school when I saw him. He was standing across the street from our house, just beyond the legal distance he was required to maintain. He wasn't supposed to be there, but there he was, watching, waiting, reminding me that he was still part of my world whether I wanted him to be or not. When he saw me see him, he smiled. That same smile that used to make me feel safe. Now it made my blood turn to ice. He mouthed something to me, and even though I couldn't hear the words, I knew what he was saying. "This isn't over." I ran the rest of the way home, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I told my mother and Ms. Chen what had happened, they called the police immediately. His bail was revoked, and he was arrested again for violating the restraining order. But the damage was done. He had reminded me that he still had power over me, that he could still make me afraid, that he could still reach me even from a distance. That night, I had the worst nightmare I'd had in weeks. I woke up screaming, and my mother held me while I cried and shook, and wished I had never said anything at all. "I want to take it back," I sobbed into her shoulder. "I want to take it all back. I want things to go back to the way they were." "No, you don't," she said firmly. "You want things to go back to the way they seemed. But they were never really okay, sweetheart. They were never really safe. Now, for the first time, they can actually get better." She was right, but it didn't make it easier. Recovery wasn't a straight line. Some days I felt strong and brave and proud of myself for speaking up. Other days I felt like I had destroyed everything I had ever known for nothing. The trial was scheduled for 6 months away. 6 months of living in limbo, of therapy sessions and legal meetings, of watching my mother try to rebuild her entire understanding of her marriage and her life. 6 months of learning how to be a normal teenager when I had never really known what normal felt like. But slowly, gradually, things began to change. I started sleeping through the night without nightmares. I started eating regular meals. I made friends with other kids in my therapy group, kids who understood what it felt like to have your trust betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you. I learned that healing wasn't about forgetting or moving on. It was about integrating the experience into who I was, about learning that I was more than what had been done to me, about discovering that I had strength I never knew I possessed. And most importantly, I learned that telling the truth, even when it's terrifying, even when it destroys everything you thought you knew, is sometimes the only way to save yourself. The girl who had been too scared to speak was finding her voice, and she was learning that her voice was powerful. Leaving him was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but staying would have killed me. And for the first time in my life I realized, I don't need anyone's permission to be free. 6 months later I stood in a courthouse in downtown Chicago, wearing a navy blue dress that my mother had bought specifically for this day. It was the first new piece of clothing I had picked out myself in years, something that made me feel strong instead of invisible, something that made me look like the young woman I was becoming instead of the frightened child I had been. The trial had been delayed twice. First because my father's lawyer argued that I was an unreliable witness, a troubled teenager with a history of behavioral problems. Then because they needed more time to gather evidence, text messages, medical records, testimonies from teachers and neighbors who had noticed changes in my behavior over the years. But now it was really happening. Today, I would face him in court. Today, I would tell my story to a room full of strangers and let them decide whether to believe me. I wasn't the same girl who had sat trembling in Dr. Stevens' office 8 months ago. Therapy had helped, but more than that, speaking the truth had given me something I had never had before: agency. For the first time in my life, I had made a choice that mattered. I had chosen to save myself. The courthouse was massive and intimidating, with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. My mother walked beside me, her hand gently resting on my back. She had changed too over these months. The woman who had once accepted everything at face value had become fierce, protective, willing to fight for her daughter in ways she had never known she possessed. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly as we approached the courtroom. "The prosecutor says they have enough evidence, even without your testimony." "I know," I said, "but I want to. I need to." And I did need to. Not for the legal case, though that was important, but for myself. I needed to look him in the eye and tell the truth without shame, without apology, without fear. I needed to take back the power he had stolen from me word by word, touch by touch, threat by threat. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, but it felt enormous when I walked in and saw him sitting at the defense table. He looked older, smaller somehow. The confident, charming man who had controlled every aspect of my life for 3 years looked diminished in his gray suit and handcuffs. When he turned to look at me, I expected to feel that familiar terror, that automatic response to hide, to shrink, to disappear. Instead, I felt something I had never felt when looking at him before: pity. He looked pathetic, desperate, like a man who had lost everything and couldn't understand how it had happened. The prosecutor, a woman named Janet Morrison, had prepared me for this moment. She was in her 40s, with graying hair and kind but determined eyes. She had prosecuted cases like mine before, and she understood the unique challenges of getting a jury to believe a teenager's word against a respected member of the community. "Just tell the truth," she had said during our preparation session. "Don't try to make it more dramatic or less dramatic than it was. Don't worry about what his lawyer might say or what the jury might think. Just tell your truth, exactly as it happened." When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt surprisingly steady. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was swearing to tell the truth about a man who had built his entire relationship with me on lies. Ms. Morrison began with gentle questions: my name, my age, where I went to school, basic facts that helped me find my rhythm, that reminded me I knew how to speak, how to be heard. Then she moved to the harder questions. "Emma, how would you describe your relationship with your father when you were younger?" "I loved him," I said, and I was surprised to find that I could say it without crying. "He was my hero. I thought he was the best dad in the world." "When did that begin to change?" "When I was 11, the first time he came to my room at night." I told the story chronologically, the way Ms. Morrison and I had practiced. I described the first incident, how confused and frightened I had been, how he had convinced me it was normal. I described how the abuse escalated over time, how the threats became more specific, how he isolated me from my mother and made me believe that I was complicit in what was happening. The hardest part wasn't describing what he had done to my body, though that was difficult enough. The hardest part was describing what he had done to my mind, how he had convinced me that I was worthless, that I deserved what was happening to me, that no one would ever believe me if I told. He told me that all fathers loved their daughters this way, I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. He told me that I was special, that our relationship was special, that it was our secret. He said that if I told anyone, they would think I was dirty and disgusting. He said my mother would hate me. He said I would be taken away and put in foster care with people who would hurt me even worse. I could see some of the jurors wiping their eyes, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. These strangers were listening to me. They were believing me. They were seeing the truth that I had been too frightened to speak for so long. When it was time for cross-examination, my father's lawyer tried to paint me as a troubled teenager seeking attention, a girl who had fabricated this story to hurt her father after he had tried to discipline her. He suggested that I was angry about normal parental restrictions, that I had been influenced by stories I had read online or seen on television, but I was ready for his questions. Dr. Stevens had helped me understand that this was part of the process, that trying to discredit the victim was a common defense strategy. I answered each question clearly and calmly, never losing my temper, never backing down from my story. Isn't it true that you were having behavioral problems at school before you made these allegations? The defense attorney asked. Yes, I said. I was having problems because I was being sexually abused by my father, and I didn't know how to cope with it. Isn't it true that you had been seeking attention from adults, acting out in class, failing to complete assignments? Yes. When a child is being abused, it affects every aspect of their life. I couldn't concentrate on schoolwork because I was terrified of going home every day. He tried for 2 hours to break my story, to find inconsistencies, to make me admit that I had lied. But I didn't break because I wasn't lying. Every word I spoke was true, and the truth has a weight and consistency that lies can never match. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, I felt something I had never experienced before. Pride. Not pride in what had happened to me, but pride in my strength, in my courage, in my refusal to be silenced any longer. The trial lasted 3 days. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological effects of child sexual abuse. My mother testified about the changes she had noticed in my behavior. Dr. Stevens testified about our sessions and the disclosure I had made. My father chose not to testify on his own behalf, which Ms. Morrison said was probably smart on his lawyer's part. He had no credible defense against the evidence, no way to explain away the medical findings, the psychological evaluations, the testimonies from multiple witnesses who had observed my changed behavior over the years. When the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts, I felt a complex mix of emotion. Relief, yes, vindication, but also sadness for the family we had been before this happened, for the father I had loved before I learned who he really was, for the innocence that could never be returned. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, 12 years for stealing 3 years of my childhood, for traumatizing me in ways that would affect me for the rest of my life. It didn't seem like enough, but it was something. It was justice, even if it wasn't healing. After the trial, my mother and I moved to a different neighborhood, not because we were ashamed, but because we needed a fresh start, a place where we could rebuild our lives without the constant reminders of what had been lost. I continued therapy, not just to deal with the trauma but to learn how to have healthy relationships, how to trust my own instincts, how to recognize that I deserved love and respect. I learned that healing isn't a destination, it's an ongoing process, with good days and bad days, setbacks and breakthroughs. I also learned that I wasn't alone. Through support groups and online communities, I connected with other survivors who understood what I had been through. Some of them had spoken up like I did. Others had chosen to remain silent, and I learned not to judge their choice. We all survive in our own ways. 3 years later, I'm 17 now, a senior in high school. I'm planning to study psychology in college, partly because I want to help other kids who have been through what I experienced, but mostly because I'm fascinated by the human capacity for resilience, for healing, for transformation. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still struggle with trust, with intimacy, with the lingering effects of trauma. But I also have something I never had during those 3 years of abuse: agency. I make my own choices now. I set my own boundaries. I know my own worth. People sometimes ask me if I regret speaking up, if I wish I had kept the secret to preserve my family. The answer is always no. That family was built on a lie, sustained by my silence, powered by my fear. Breaking it apart was the only way to build something real in its place. My mother and I have a relationship now that's based on truth instead of hidden pain. She's dating someone new, a gentleman who makes her laugh and who treats me with the respect and appropriate boundaries that should exist between an adult and a teenager. I can see her healing too, learning to trust her instincts again, learning to forgive herself for not knowing what she couldn't have known. As for my father, I don't hate him anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I need all my energy for living, for healing, for becoming the woman I'm meant to be. I pity him, and I hope that somewhere in his prison cell, he's facing the truth of what he did and trying to understand the damage he caused. But mostly I don't think about him at all, because this is my story now, not his, mine, and I'm the one writing the next chapter.